Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
You did great. I don't know why you were worried. Hi, everybody. My name is Winnie Eddy. I'm the wife of an alcoholic, a member of Al-Anon, and I am not always grateful for either one. I'm sorry. In my heyday, I could have fixed that. But now I'm going to leave it alone. Because I was talking up in Alhambra one time, and the microphone had a terrible hum in it. And I thought I'd fix it for him, and I did. Well, I got rid of the microphone. I didn't get rid of the hum because that was coming from the aquarium behind me. But it taught me my limited electronic talents, so I leave things pretty much alone. I would like to thank the committee for a very, very beautiful weekend. I debated when I got up this morning whether I could prolong this wonderful weekend if I just didn't come to the closing meeting on time. That's one of the more rational ideas I used to have when I was well. And it dawned on me that with or without me, they'd close it. So I came. I have had a wonderful weekend, though, you know, and I am going to take away with me so much more than probably I'll leave, but that's not my problem. My problem is that I am still able to learn, and for that I am eternally grateful. For those of you who probably don't know, I am not an authority on Al-Anon. I haven't got the slightest idea how it works, and for that I am grateful. Because if I knew how it worked, I'd fix it. You know, I'm one of those people. I am grateful every day of my life that I came to Al-Anon when I did, because at that time you either were or you weren't. And you didn't have all those decisions to make as to where you went. You either went to AA or you went to Al-Anon. Because I'd still be standing out there in the cold all by myself if I had had to make the decisions that some people have to make today, you know. I didn't like Al-Anon at all when I first got here, and I didn't like it to the point I tried to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I took their 20 questions test and I flunked it. And I went to the guy I figured was the big shot in our particular area. He was the one that always got the chair with the seat in it. Because, well, when I came into Al-Anon, you know, despite the way meeting rooms and Alano clubs are furnished today, they used to furnish them with rejects from the Goodwill. And if you didn't hit your bottom before you got there, you did shortly thereafter, you know, because none of the darn things had any springs in them. But this guy got the one that held up, looked a little bit like a throne, too. And so I figured he had to be at least a supervisor. And I went to him and I confessed. I said, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he said, what makes you think so? Well, I said, I flunked your test. Oh, he said, if you flunked that test, chances are you are an alcoholic. When did you have your last drink? Well, I said, I think it was about 3 years ago. And he said, lady, if it's been 3 years ago and you got to think about it, go back over with those women and let them help you. Now, I don't know what shape you were in when you got to this fellowship, but I'll tell you something about me. At that particular time, I think I pulled the plug. Huh? Am I doing good? Okay. I don't know whether you're going to get the whole story or not. But anyhow, at that particular time, being rejected by Alcoholics Anonymous didn't do a lot for me. So when I went back over with those women, it was with one idea in mind. I wanted to get them to help me get even with them. See? Because that's the way I lived. I was always recruiting these people to help me get even with those people. And it wasn't long before these people became those people. It was a very busy time of life. And after I got there, I stayed for another reason, though. There happened to be a female in that group that was without a doubt the nastiest woman I have ever come in contact with, and I decided to outsit her. It really wasn't what she said to me, because she never said anything. But she'd look at me and she'd go, and I didn't know what that meant. And she knitted, which almost drove me up a wall, too, because I don't knit. And when you're perfect and you don't knit, you're in big trouble, you know. I didn't even begin to believe I was sick, which was one of the first things they told me, until I started to like her. And then I went right to my sponsor and I told her, I said, I think I'm beginning to like her. And Wilma had one answer for every situation. It's all right. I could have told her I shot my husband and she'd say, it's all right, you know. And I said, no, it really isn't. And she asked why, and I told her. I said, I've never changed my mind about anyone. And that's probably the first truth that I had told in a long, long time. Because, you see, I used to put people in categories, those you encouraged, those you tolerated, and those you ignored. And once I had you placed, you had to stay there, because I didn't know how to shuffle you around. And I realized today that I probably deprived myself of a lot of very meaningful relationships because of my inability to allow people to be whatever they want to be. Now, there are probably some alcoholics in the group today, so if you don't mind, I'm going to give them their message first. Well, you know how they are, and truth of the matter is, I'm not even sure I got a message for them, but I talked out in Fontana one time, which is a little place east of where I live, and it really wasn't one of my better days, so it did surprise me when this woman came up to me after the meeting, and she said, where are you going to be the next time? And I said, well, I'm not sure. Why? Well, she said, I'd just love to have my husband hear you, which made me think I had said something rather profound. But I couldn't remember what it was, so I asked her. I said, do you think I could help your husband? Well, she said, not really, but after he hears you, he's going to be glad he got me. So that may be the only message they get, but it works in Alateen, too. Anyhow, I only have one story. I don't try to apologize for it because, like I said the other night, I used to feel sorry for people that had to hear me over and over and over again. But then one day I took an inventory on it, and, you know, I came up with an astounding statistic. They couldn't possibly have heard it as many times as I've told it. So my sympathies are back where they belong. I grew up in a family where there was a drinking problem, at least I thought there was. And when I got to Al-Anon, I used to call my father an alcoholic. But actually, I don't know whether he was or not. He didn't think he was. He thought he was a social drinker. He lived a social drinker, and he died a social drinker. But he liked it. And when I wasn't helping him, he liked me, too. But when I got to Al-Anon, I could spot an alcoholic 2 miles away. Anybody that was going into a bar, coming out of a bar, standing in front of a liquor store, or just looking strange, to me was an alcoholic, see? Because that's what I was accustomed to, strange people. I never really knew either where they came from, but they always moved next door to me. I was always surrounded by weirdos, you know. Now, in growing up, it wasn't what my father did that bothered me. it's what my father wouldn't do that bothered me. I happened to be a born researcher, and at a very early age, I did a little research on fathers. Now, this takes some footwork because you have to cover the neighborhood and watch the fathers. Then I would come home and look at mine. He never did any of the things he was supposed to do. And I did make some suggestions, but I was raised in a hard-headed Irish family, and my father just wouldn't take direction from a 4 or 5, 6-year-old, whatever I happened to be at the time. So right then is when I set a pattern to my life that lasted until I got to Al-Anon. I got even. I ignored him. And you better believe my ignoring him made my life more miserable than all his drinking could have done if he'd have been drinking at me. Because when I was away at school, I could be honest about my mother, my brothers, and my sister, but never my father. I used to describe him the way he should be, which made life very, very difficult because it meant nobody could go home with me. If they did, they were going to find out one of two things right now. The man that was living with my mother was not my father. Or that I was the biggest liar that ever came down the pike. Now, I never considered myself a liar. I looked upon myself as a diplomat because I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the truth. And I thought there was a difference. See, I learned at a very early age that people anticipate what you're going to say. So if you lead them up to a certain point and stop, they guess what you would have said if you'd have gone on. But they're very poor guessers, though I really never felt I should be held responsible for their inadequacies. And I have trouble with that even sometimes today because since Eddie's been sober and taken an interest in my welfare, which is really just a nice way of saying he don't tell me to drop dead as often as he used to. But if I'm going someplace that's quite a ways away, he usually volunteers to go with me. Now, this, at least for me, is a test of serenity, because I happen to be married to the original. Don't know where he's going when he leaves. He don't know where he is when he gets there. And generally, he don't know where he's been when he gets back. But if he goes with me, he directs me every step of the way, you know. And we're at opposite ends of the pole when it comes to being anything alike, because I happen to be married to a thinker. Sometimes he thinks 2-3 weeks before he answers you, you know, which really isn't as bad as it sounds. It's a marvelous memory course because you have to keep in mind everything you've been talking about, see? Because when he comes up with the answer, he never connects it to anything, see? He just says, yes. I'll give you a better example. Since he's given up drinking, he's taken up dusting. And that's almost as bad as drinking. But we happened to be playing golf one day, and I just sort of glanced over, you know, and that son of a gun was dusting the golf cart with my sweater. And I took an exception to it. I mean, you know, and so when I got back in the cart, I merely said to him, when you die, I'm going to bury you in a plastic bag. And he didn't say anything, so I didn't say anything. But about 2 weeks later, we were having, I thought, a very friendly cup of coffee. And all of a sudden, he said, I don't think that was very nice. See? Thought it over, didn't like the bag idea, I guess. I don't know, but that's the way he is, and I'm getting used to it. But on the other hand, I'm one of those people that reacts immediately. You know, I try to get it done before I really know what you want me to do. So if you put two people like that in one automobile, you do have a little bit of a problem. Because if we're going down the freeway and he says turn right, I turn right now. And he'll say, not here. I'm about 60 miles too soon. So on this particular night I'm going to tell you about, I had been asked to come to Chula Vista. And I was having a moment of growth, or whatever you want to call it. I just knew I wasn't well enough to go that far with him without running over him. But I didn't want to tell him I didn't want him to go, see, because he gets hurt so easy. And then I have to make amends, and I just didn't want to get involved with all that stuff. So I just said, Eddie, I'm going to a meeting, and he said, okay, and I left. But unfortunately, I didn't get home at 10:30 or 11:15 that night. I got home about 1:15, and when I walked through the door, there he stood, right in my spot, with that age-old question, where the hell have you been? Yeah. And without even thinking, I said, well, how far do you think it is to Chula Vista? Now, he accused me of lying to him, but I didn't lie to him. I didn't tell him I wasn't going to Chula Vista. And if he had said, Winnie, are you going to Chula Vista? I was going to say yes. Are you getting the picture? Yeah. If you were bright enough to ask the right question, you got the whole story. And if you weren't, you got stuck with what you thought. Well, anyhow, I don't know. There was one little habit that my father had that kind of slipped into later years. That was sleeping on the living room floor. Now, he never really liked sleeping on the living room floor, but it worked out that way quite often. He'd come home and he'd sit down, then he'd lean down, then he'd lay down. And it was a pretty good indication he was good for the night. And my mother, being the type person she was, let me know that is his business. You tend to your business, we'll have no problems. So I used to step over him and go about my business. But I should have stepped on him. He bothered me on that living room floor. And when I got one of my own that used to pick peculiar places to sleep, I didn't care if he was on the lawn or the porch. I always had kind of a fondness for the freeway. Well, logically speaking, Eddie had a double indemnity clause in his insurance, you see, and that was one of the first games we ever played. I kept paying the premiums, and he took vitamins with his beer, but I couldn't stand him on that living room floor. And I can remember to this minute taking him by the heels, and I'd pull him, just like that, and his head would bounce. I really loved it when his head bounced. There is something about that thud that makes you feel good, deep down inside. Because I really wanted to hurt him the way I thought he was trying to hurt me. And drunk as he was, he'd say, you're not mad at me, you're mad at your father, And I had a standard answer. Compared to you, my father was a Boy Scout. Now, that's the tragedy, I think, at least with me, is the fact that, as an example, at a meeting not too long ago, there was a little gal that was about up to here with him. And everything was him. And when she paused or stopped or whatever she did, I leaned over to her and I said, honey, that wouldn't have bothered me at all. And she looked at me like I'd crawled out from underneath a rock recently. And she said, why wouldn't it have bothered you? I said, because it was your husband. And you see, that's part of the problem. I could walk in and see two people doing exactly the same thing, but if one of them belonged to me, there was trouble. The other guy was all right. Anyhow, I don't know what happened to the guy I met, fell in love with, and permitted to marry me, but as soon as he was mine, I decided to help him. I wanted to help him become what I knew he wanted to be for my sake. Now, I'm not well enough yet to define that for you, but I'm going to tell you something that I didn't tell him, and that is that my help is deadly. I actually had friends that wouldn't tell me they were in trouble just for fear I'd help them, because I have a knack for those sort of things. But, of course, when Eddie and I got married, we ceased to be friends. We became competitors. He spent his life trying to outwit me, while I spent my life trying to outwit him. And the upshot of the whole thing is, when we got here, we were a couple of half-wits. But he was in the Navy. He was a professional man, a full lieutenant. And I didn't go into this blindly. As I said before, I research almost as a recreation. I did a little job on the Navy, and unfortunately for them, came across the table of operations. And I happened to notice that there was only a couple of lines between what he was and what I decided to help him become, which was admiral. I knew they only had one admiral in the dental corps. I only had one man in mind for the job. It really didn't look as difficult as it turned out to be. But had I been halfway bright, I would have joined the Navy myself, because I showed up every day. He only showed up when the spirit moved him, and I'd have made a pretty good shore patrolman, too, because I got just enough bird dog in me that when I'd show up and find out he hadn't gotten there, I'd just put my nose to the ground and away I'd go, and sooner or later I always found him, that's true, but by then it was usually he was so drunk I couldn't let anybody else find him, so that's when I used to hide him. We played hide and seek for years, really, but he didn't know there was a game going on. But after he came to Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, I really felt I should help him with the program because I wasn't sure that he was bright enough to get what they said they wanted to give him. So I went to every meeting, and I had a little notebook, and I would jot down a few of the pertinent things that applied to his peculiar case, and then I'd sort of spoon-feed it to him during the week. Well, you know, if they had another examination, I wanted the dummy to pass. And I heard two things in those meetings that are worse than drinking. Lots of things are worse than drinking. Sobriety, for instance. Now, I can only speak for myself, but it was always easier for me to watch Eddie throw up than grow up. It just worked out that way. But one of the things I heard was sleep teaching. I got myself a big AA book, and every night, just as he dozed off, I would open it to chapter 5, and I would read to him how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our... It was a beautiful reading. Emphasis on the proper words, phraseology was just, oh. In fact, I memorized the whole 5th chapter, and dummy slept through the whole damn thing, but I still think it's the reason when we go to an AA meeting outside our own area where when you walk in, people don't really know which one's which. Would you believe it's still me they come up to? They say, keep coming back, honey, it'll work. Yeah, well, anyhow, I heard a fellow up in Lancaster, it's been a while ago now, but he said one of the things that made it difficult for him to come to Alcoholics Anonymous was the fact that none of them looked like alcoholics. But he figured in the 15 and a half years he'd been associated with this fellowship, he had come in contact with, somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 alcoholics. That's quite a number. And would you believe that of that number, only 10 really looked like alcoholics? Turned out to be Al-Anons. So that ought to give you an idea where you're starting, you know. Well, anyhow, I'm sure you know how I felt. Well, first of all, this game of hide and seek, you know, right after I got to Al-Anon, they took away from me some of my finer phrases, such as, you had better not be drunk tonight. If I smell liquor on your breath, your clothes will be on the porch. Now, my neighbors thought I was some kind of a fresh air nut because I put them out every night and brought them in every morning. But when I got to Al-Anon, they wouldn't let me say that or do that, so I had to find a way to get the message across. And when I heard that bit about gratitude, you know, you can't get drunk if you're grateful, I just latched right onto it. Every morning when Eddie would leave for the office, I'd say, remember, today we're going to be grateful. And he'd say, for what? And so I used to give him things to be grateful for, but I wasn't that grateful myself in those days. So without even realizing it, probably, I started one of the first gratitude lists for him. I jotted down a few things he should be grateful for, starting with myself, of course. And I finally remembered this game of hide and seek that we used to play. And so one morning I explained to him, because I'm a great explainer. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I was one of those people that was never able to say yes or no. I had to give you a detailed explanation. Sometimes I got so convincing I'd change my mind right in the middle. And I'm not much better than that today, to tell you the truth. The example I always use is my wristwatch. I always wanted a watch with a little teeny-weeny tiny face, something that would, kind of reflect my personality. And as soon as my eyes got bad, Eddie bought me one. Yeah, well, his timing has always been perfect. But anyhow, I complained about it so much that he got me another one about that big with a band. And in my enthusiasm, I pulled the stem out. Well, Lord, I didn't want him to think I was abusing his gift, so I fixed it myself, which is an advantage. Like I said in the beginning, most us Al-Anons can fix anything. Might not always work, but it don't look bad, you know. And but I kind of lucked out with that watch, and I happened to be up in Kanab, Utah, and some poor unsuspecting Utahn, noticing I had a watch, asked me what time it was. Well, I had to tell him about the watch with the little teeny-weeny face and the bad eyes and getting the big one and pulling the stem out and fixing it myself, and it gains 5 minutes every 24 hours. I've had it 3 years. Now, there's an hour's difference between California and Kanab, and I finally figured it out, and I looked up, and the man was gone. I really, it did something to me because, I felt like 007 standing on a corner talking to my wristwatch, or Get Smart or something. But very few people asked me anything. But, of course, at that period, Eddie was a hostage, so I did explain to him that when he drank excessively, it had been necessary for me on occasion to hide him. And I had put him in some rather out-of-the-way places, but I'd never lost him, so be grateful. And I did put him in some strange places, and the one that I always tell about, and if I don't, somebody reminds me, happened right over here at the Long Beach Naval Station. And one of the reasons I tell it is because it points out a lot of things about me. They used to have a mock submarine just inside the sentry gate. And one morning, I came across Lloyd John in front of that mock submarine with his six-pack of beer at the exact moment that I spotted his commanding officer coming from the opposite direction. Now, I had just told that man one of my better stories, which means I had to get rid of him. You can understand that. He was living proof I hadn't told the whole story. But it might help you to see the situation if you knew that when I came to Al-Anon, I had one of the greatest pitching arms in the world. I could actually throw a full six-pack of beer farther than he had strength enough to retrieve it. So if I was around and he had a six-pack of beer, he'd hold it, like I was going to take it away from him. Well, anyhow, the only place I had to put him was in that sub, and it wasn't as hard as it sounds. I just helped him up. He fell down because he didn't know where he was going. But getting him out, that's a whole nother story, He didn't trust me, so he wouldn't hand me the beer. And I have many times since wondered what that sentry must have thought of that female, half in, half out of the conning tower, that damn submarine, finally coming up with this lieutenant commander holding his beer in his hat. He thought he'd been torpedoed right in the middle of Long Beach, because he didn't know where he was. And I used to worry about the sentry, because I went on that base like I owned it in my housecoat and my curlers. I really don't believe that the alcoholic appreciates what we give up in order to help them. Now, in my particular case, it was dressing. I did have a choice. I could always go to bed in whatever I was going to wear the next day, but I just don't think you get that comfortable feeling that you have with one of them old house coats. Mine happened to be a chenille number. I wasn't like Ramona. In fact, mine had double duty. If somebody upset me, I'd pluck it while I planned. And I think when I actually got rid of it, it looked like lace, but... Gosh, I had an opportunity of talking over at the naval station. It's sort of God's way of helping me make amends. But there was an AA member in the group that night, and after the meeting he came up to me and he said, Winnie, if you ever get nostalgic, come on down. I'll take you through that submarine. It was one of my favorite drinking places. Now, would you believe my mind went back 20 years that fast? And I thought, dear God in heaven, I wonder what I would have done if I had reached down and come up with the wrong one, you know. Because it never dawned on me there could be two of them down there. It was just one of those things. But anyhow, I'm sure you know how I felt when Eddie came home and announced he had resigned from the Navy. I was like somebody that had lost a business, because I had started to wonder about him. That part is true. But I never blamed the drinking. See, I didn't want my husband to come to Alcoholics Anonymous and quit drinking. I wanted him to learn to mind. Because I never objected to him having a drink. Sometimes I allowed him to. And there were times when 3 possibly were called for. But there was a strangeness about this man that I just could not understand. It seemed like one drink and he was set in cement. I couldn't do anything with him. And I don't know how many times I used to say to him, when we are invited to a cocktail party on Friday, we can come home on Friday. We don't have to stay till Monday. You know. And one of my confusions, I think, stemmed from the fact that I liked those cocktail parties. See, I liked that nice, easy social life in the service, and I didn't even mind making a fool out of myself. Occasionally. But he was making a career out of it, and I didn't understand it. The strange part of it is that as his drinking increased, mine decreased. It became more important for me to know where he was, who he was with, where they were going, how they were going to get there, or what was he thinking. Have you ever tried to read somebody's mind through their eyeballs when their lids are at half-mast? It's not easy. You know, and when I first got to Al-Anon, as I said earlier, we didn't have near the meetings and the literature and the things that they have today. And so to kind of keep me out of trouble, my sponsor took me to a lot of open AA meetings. And for that, I am eternally grateful, because I believe it was in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that I learned to laugh, where I used to hear some of those guys stand up there and tell some of the most horrendous stories. And all them idiots were laughing. I knew how he felt. But they laughed, and I didn't know what they were laughing at. And then, by the same token, I'd see somebody come up and get a 1-year birthday cake. And you could look around, and those self-same people had a look on their faces that I have never been able to forget. That look of gratitude that you find in an AA, Al-Anon, or Alateen meeting of one more person, thank you God, has found the path that has meant so much to us. But you don't take someone like me into an AA meeting without there being trouble. These people needed me. And they just wouldn't listen. I mean, one of their favorite sayings was, it's the first drink. And I used to tell them it is not the first drink. But I couldn't remember whether it was the second, the third, or the fourth. But see, I wasn't trying to figure out what alcohol did to him. I was trying to figure out where I lost control. And I got so bad about it that one night on the way home, my sponsor said to me, Winnie, don't help them, let them suffer. And so I quit helping them. But you know, the good Lord has a way of working in my life, whether I like it or not. And eventually, when I was ready, he got me to an AA meeting where the guy talked almost exclusively on the first drink. And after the meeting, we ran into him in the coffee shop, which is to say we got into the same coffee shop. I spotted him, and I said to Eddie, I think I'll run over and tell that man that if he intends to talk at a public level, he should be more factual. Now, I like to give the devil his due. My husband has never deprived me of making as big a jackass out of myself as I want to. And so he just sat there while I traipsed across the coffee shop, sat down with this complete stranger, and picked his talk apart. Now, I think I scared him. I'm really not sure, but he had a glazed look. for almost a full minute, until he got his voice back. Happened to be a railroad man from Texas. And when he did get his voice back, he said to me, "Well, honey, let me put it to you this way. When you get killed by a train, it warn't the caboose that did it." And I haven't had any trouble with the first string since. Because I know about trains. I know all about trains. I just don't know anything about alcoholism. Because I'm not an alcoholic. I know how I feel, but I had to give up guessing how he felt. But I was still a long way from Al-Anon. I still thought a good wife was responsible for making something out of what you got stuck with. So I started wondering what I was going to do with him, because once he got out of the Navy, making an admiral out of him wasn't as easy as I had anticipated. And while I was thinking about it, I happened to remember his mother. I never liked his mother, and I really didn't have any reason not to like her. And in fact, that I didn't like her is no big deal either. There were lots of people I didn't like. Whole towns I didn't like, So it's really no big deal that I didn't like her either, but she did have some peculiarities. For instance, she didn't believe in drinking anything but water. And it suddenly dawned on me that is probably what Eddie's problem is. You see, he wasn't raised in a social drinking family such as mine, so the poor thing probably just doesn't know how to drink. So I decided to teach him. Have you ever tried to teach a drunk how to drink? You got one big problem. You got to get him sober enough to find out if he's learning anything that you're teaching him. So in order to do that, I got him out of California. Hated California. To me, it was one large bar separated by an occasional liquor store. And I took him back. Well, I wanted to take him back to the Middle West, where people are really people. That's where I'm from. And that decision lasted, well, till I got to Gallup, New Mexico. I spent 3 miserable days in that godforsaken place, and I only made a teeny-weeny mistake. I stopped. And he got away from me. In fact, he got into a bar I was afraid to follow him into, because from where I was sitting, he and a tribe of Indians went in. And of course, I know what Indians, and I'm a great John Wayne fan, and I didn't want them to get me, and I didn't care if they got him, so I just sat outside and waited. Never dawned on me there was a back door to that place. He went in the front door and out the back door. Wherever he wanted to go, in the back door, out the front door, and Old Faithful was always spouting right where he'd left her, And I always like to mention the little Indian gal that was standing in front of that place, because I think she was my first contact with that very special something that I feel I have found in Al-Anon. In AA, they call it the unspoken language. But in Al-Anon, at least for me, I think it's the language of the heart. This is the only place in my life that I have ever been where I can feel what somebody else is saying. Or I can watch them walk in for the first time, and I don't have to know who they are, where they came from, what kind of a car do they drive, how many children do they have, what does their husband do. I don't have to have statistics. All I have to do is look in their eyes. And when I see in their eyes that same, there ain't nobody home here look that I've seen in my eyes, I know where they've been. Little gal that was visiting L.A. from Canada probably put it in better words than I have ever been able to when she was describing how they handle their meetings up there. And she said, we have greeters at our meetings, and when I went to my first Al-Anon meeting, the girl put her hand out and said, "My name is Elsa." And she said, I was so upset that all I could say to that woman was, "I've been to hell and back." And she said, that girl never even hesitated. She just smiled sweetly and said, "Well, isn't it strange then that we've never met before?" Because that's the way it is. Whether I like to admit it or not, I paved my road to hell with my fears and my suspicions and my ambition for somebody else's life. But I didn't know until I got to Al-Anon who the Master Mason really was. But sitting there in Gallup, New Mexico, I was a long way from Al-Anon. I looked over at that little Indian gal, and I was so embarrassed that she would allow herself to be degraded by standing in front of that place. While I am across the street making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 5 children, she looks strange to me. Second day, she looked pretty good, but the third day kind of hid her, you know, 'cause she had her side of the street and I had mine. And if you've ever been to Gallup, New Mexico, that's it, 2 sides of the street. And we had them both covered. So anyhow, I had to make one of my many decisions, and I decided I would never again stop where the human race could contaminate my husband. Now, if you are driving across country in an automobile and you don't intend to stop, you must make adjustments. And some dummy told me that Texas had dry counties, so that's the adjustment I made. I mapped out a course so that I never stopped unless I was in a dry county, which really didn't help a whole lot. He got just as drunk in a dry one as he would have in a wet one. But when you're going crazy on a slow, easy plan, this will help you. You can spend hours wondering, where did he get it? I don't know where they get it, but I'll tell you something I do know. If I had buried him, he'd have come up drunk, and I don't know where they get it. But my kids think Texas is the biggest place on earth because it took us almost 2 weeks to get through it. See, I didn't know Texas puts one dry one between 2 wet ones. Did you know that? I damn near never got out of Texas. And it was kind of an unwritten law as far as the kids were concerned. If she stops and you got anything to do, get out, get it done, and get back. She'll never miss you. Which is probably true, because I concentrated on that seat. And if it was full, we went. And if it was empty, we waited. Very simple way of life. Of course, God alone knows how much travel time we lost when he got in the back by mistake. I never looked back there. That is not where he is supposed to be. And I could depend on those kids. They wouldn't have said anything because one of their favorite sayings was, "Don't upset her," which used to upset me. Now, all I'm offering today is my opinion, how I think and how I feel. But I don't believe my kids reacted to the alcoholic. My kids reacted to my reaction to the alcoholic. Because it's true, as I believe Ramona said the other day, Eddie came home drunk lots of times. And he did very strange things. But they knew he was drunk. They knew he was strange. How do you explain me? I am running the group. And I don't know where I am half the time, you know. I had one kid, our number 2 son, I couldn't keep that kid in school to save my soul. I'd take him to school, the son of a gun would be waiting for me when I got home. And after he got to go into Alateen and I got to go into Al-Anon, and we got to where we could talk as people instead of God and the little child, which is the way it had been. I asked him one day, I said, "Billy, why wouldn't you go to school? Didn't you like school?" He said, "Mom, I really did. But I was afraid you'd move while I was gone." See? That can be a real fear to a little kid. In fact, my kid had a formula for me. If she puts her shoes on, she's going out. But if she gets dressed, we're moving. See? Their life was rather simple, too. Well, anyhow, I have 8 children altogether, and usually I make you count them as they creep in just like I did. I was always surprised. Eddie was a little shocked, too, when he sobered up. He thought I was babysitting for a living. But that's actually his story, and I try to stay away from it. But I have probably the only set of twins on earth that ever had to be explained, you know, because when I left California, I knew I was expecting a baby, but I always lived on a schedule. You know, make the beds at 7 o'clock, which isn't always easy if they don't get up till 8. And then I had all these other impossible things in a list, and I had been busy. I set up a beautiful dental office, really beautiful dental office. I even had patients, but I had no dentist. And I had been doing a few other things, but it was, you know, getting kind of close to the time, so I went up to see this doctor in Kansas City, and with all due respect, you know, doctors are very happy people. Most of them are just glad you're sick. But You should have seen it. He helped me in, sat me down, patted me on the head, and then he hit me with a brick. Mrs. Eddy, you're going to have twins. And I almost died in his office because I wasn't really counting on one, and he's insisting on two. And I had these problems. I had 5 plus that thing I didn't know what to do with, a dental office with no dentist, and besides all that, I knew what Eddie was going to say when I told him because he said it. There are no twins in my family. I got so involved defending my moral character that I forgot there were twins in my family. It wasn't until they arrived and my mother said, "Isn't it nice now we have another set of twins?" I said, "In whose family?" She said, "Ours." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" She said, "You never asked me." No big deal. I never ask anybody anything. Can you think of a better way for people to find out you don't know something than to ask them? Well, even when I used to get lost, I would just pull into a filling station and I'd say to the attendant, "Where are you located?" Because I knew if I found out where he was, I'd know where I was, see? And the whole point was that he wasn't supposed to know I didn't know. That was the whole thing. Well, at the appointed time, of course, I went into the hospital. Here again, hospitals are very happy places. There's people happy they got there. Some are happy going home. I had been happy once it hadn't worked out well. So I didn't really want what they had. And as soon as I could, I had a phone put in. And if I thought I was getting happy, I'd just pick up that phone and call the office. Now, I knew that Eddie wasn't going to answer that phone. I wasn't even sure he knew I'd put a phone in there. But the point I'm trying to make is, I don't need him to make me miserable, or you, or them out there. All I have to have is a little bit of time to think, to wonder. Where is he? And who is he with? And what are they doing? While I lie here? 15 minutes is all it takes. You're having hysterics, you know, and the nurse don't know what happened to you. You haven't even had a visitor. And you look like you've been hit by a truck. Because being a martyr isn't easy, you know. That's a 24-hour-a-day concentrated effort, if you want the look, you know. That's circles down to here, preferably with bags. Tear stains that get kind of worn in. And then if you follow the proper procedure, which is lots of coffee, plenty of cigarettes, but positively no sleep, that's when you're rewarded with the big one. That's sort of a twitch. Yeah. Well, can you imagine giving up all that excitement and travel for this? That's what I had to do. As I told you in the beginning, it was a letter, or maybe I didn't tell you in the beginning. Sometimes I tell you in the beginning, and sometimes I don't tell you at all. But it actually was a letter that my husband wrote that got me into Al-Anon. You know, I guess I'm getting close to forgiving him. Maybe that's why I don't remember it too often. That son of a gun turned himself in to the hospital to do something about his drinking, you see, despite the help I had been giving him. And while he was in the hospital, he had to go to AA meetings. And at an AA meeting, he heard about Al-Anon, and so he sat down and wrote a letter to the Al-Anon Central Office in Los Angeles and told them there was something wrong with me. And, you know, I guess it was almost predestined that I should get here because I didn't know this for a long time, but the gal who actually got the call from Central Office to call on me had a hair appointment. That's how important I was. And she didn't want to cancel her hair appointment, so she called Wilma C., who eventually called on me. And I am so grateful today, both that Eddie wrote the letter and that Peggy W. had a hair appointment, because God sent me a sponsor who had the patience of Job. I wasn't an easy nut to crack. You had to catch me first. And the first afternoon that Wilma came to my house, she found the front door nailed shut, which was necessary. I actually was in no shape to cover 2 doors. I was pooped, you know. And so Wilma went around to the back, and she found the car in the driveway, the coffee pot boiling on the stove, and she yoo-hooed me a couple of times, but she couldn't find me. So she went next door, and she asked this little old lady whether or not Mrs. Eddy was at home. You know what the woman said? Even if she is. That woman thought I was crazy. And I resented that. I mean, actually, I never bothered her. Once when we did almost get trapped in the backyard together, I hid in the bushes till she went in. So she had no reason to say that. And my kids didn't bother her either. I never forbid them to go over there because I've always felt forbidding children to do things leave scars. So I preferred just a little psychology, you know. I told them the story of Hansel and Gretel, let them make up their own minds. You want to end up in an oven, go right over there, see. But she scared Wilma, and when she came back that night, she had a friend with her. And I don't know to this day how she got in, but I used to get my kids to bed on a production basis. You know, everybody in the tub, everybody washed, rinsed, out, dried, dressed in bed so mother can worry. And Wilma came between the drying and the dressing process. See, I couldn't hide them. Hell, I couldn't even catch them. I had all these little naked bodies running around. But she never even hesitated. She picked up a towel and she dried and she talked. Alcoholics, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon family groups. I didn't even know they lived in the neighborhood. But she finally used the magic word, drunks. And I knew why she was there. She needed me. She did. That's what she said. She told me that I had survived something I didn't even know I had. And now a whole bunch of other people had it. And she was going to get them together, and we were going to help them as a group. Now, that's what it sounded like. But whatever she brought in with her that night, she took out with her, too, because I gave her just time enough to get home, and then I called and told her something very important had come up. I would be unable to attend the meeting she was scheduling. Now, I hadn't done anything unimportant for a long time, but I couldn't let her know that. I couldn't let her find out how unimportant I thought I was. And that should have been the first chink in the armor. That should have been the first time I began to realize I never hid from you. I hid from me. Because somewhere way back yonder, I got the crazy idea that I didn't measure up to what I thought you thought I ought to be. And so I built this wall that was to keep you from finding out how truly inadequate I thought I was. And the sad part of the story is, I'm the one that got lost behind the wall. You see, when I came to Al-Anon, I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I didn't care. Because I knew it had to end. I just wanted it to hurry. But even a defective character will put you in good stead occasionally. You know, I had told this woman I would help her. And so 2 weeks later, I went to my first meeting in Azusa, California. And the good Lord willing, I hope I never, ever forget that meeting. I don't ever want to be an old-timer in this way of life. I was an old-timer when I got here. But I want to remember what it felt like that night to walk from a world of absolute chaos into a place of absolute peace. Nobody cared who I was, where I came from, what my husband did, where he was, how many children I had, what kind of car did I have. All of these things that I had held with such importance and was ashamed of most of them, they didn't ask about. The fact that I was there seemed to be the number one thing on the agenda. But I'd been involved with a lot of women's clubs. I even joined the DAR to help them close the bars. And that was all women, and I knew how they operated, and so I played their game. I took as much of the free literature as I could take without looking interested. I borrowed a book. I didn't want to get financially involved at the moment. And I went home and I studied. I memorized the steps. I even memorized the traditions. I waited 24 hours, and then I called Wilma, and I said, it is not working for me. I told her of all the work I had done, and she said, well, you don't memorize the steps, you work them. And I realized then I had gotten a sick sponsor. Because, you know, in all the literature we have today, there's not one direction, there's not one recipe, there's not one test. There's a bunch of words. And personally, I don't think you can read this program. I think you have to live it. And regardless of how much reading you do, if you don't go to a meeting and share with somebody else what you got out of what you read and listen to what they got out of what they read, somewhere in the middle of that is an answer. Because I'm also a great believer in that as many people as there are in this fellowship, there are that many ways that it works successfully. But Wilma did make one mistake. She said, we use the same steps in Al-Anon they use in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the way I used them. I mean, I worked them. I am not powerless over alcohol. I can take it or leave alone. If it hadn't been for him, I'd have managed beautifully. So I left it. Second one had that unfortunate word, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Even an idiot knows if you're going to be restored, you got to be nuts to begin with. And I wasn't, but he was sitting up in Camarillo, so I figured he was, so I left that one for him, too. Third one I skipped for both of us. Well, it asked me to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. Well, I understood him. He did not understand me. And I really didn't hate Eddie, so I skipped it for both of us. Now, I wasn't going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, but I would give it to anybody else on earth, whether they asked for it or not. And the example I use is that freeway, wherever it is. See, when I get on the freeway, I go right over to the left-hand lane because that goes straight ahead, and that's where I'm going. I didn't find out until yesterday that it must be Paul that gets on right behind me, rushes past me, moves over, and then slows down. Which means I got to get over here, get ahead of him, move back over, and slow down. So he'll know how I feel. So he gets ahead of me, then I get ahead of him, then he gets ahead of me, then I get ahead of him, and about 5 miles up the road, he puts on his right-hand blinker and leaves the freeway because he's home. I'm 5 miles past my turn because he has had control of my life, but I wasn't going to turn it over to God. However, I did notice when I would call Wilma with little situations, she'd say, well, just turn it over. She never said to whom, which I can understand. It's an anonymous program, and you don't tell everybody who handles the problems. But on this particular day, I thought I had a big one, and she was having a bad day or something, because when I called her to share, she snapped at me. She said, for heaven's sakes, Winnie, turn it over. I said, you don't have to get upset, Wilma. You just don't realize you've never said to whom. Well, she said, I thought you knew you turn it over to God. I said, not me. I haven't even told him I'm going to Al-Anon yet. You know, it's just one of those things. So I could tell by the tone of her voice this upset her, and I didn't want to upset her because she was very ill, this woman. And so I began to wonder, what could I turn over to God that he couldn't louse up that would make her happy? And took me almost 3 days, and finally I called her. I said, okay, Wilma, I'm turning something over to God. She said, good. What are you turning over? I said, my ironing. She said, you're ironing? I said, well, you told me it didn't make any... Oh, no. She said, that's all right, that's all right. And I want you to know, God don't like to iron either. Because I used to keep my ironing in a cabinet just in case I got the urge, you know. And when I turned it over to him, his ironing slopped out of the cabinet, ended up in boxes. Eventually, they ended up in the rump. It was a mess. And whenever Wilma would come over, I'd say, I want you to see the ironing. And that's when she'd give me routine number 1, you know, it's all right. So I figured if it don't bother her and it don't bother him, I won't let it bother me either. And then one night after an AA meeting, this guy walks up to me, and he said, Winnie, you got a bunch of kids, don't you? And I said, yes. I was admitting it by then. And He said, well, I go to an orphanage down in Mexico, and those little guys could surely use anything that possibly your kids have outgrown. So I just promised him I would go right home, arrange everything. He could just pick it up at his leisure. But I am a procrastinator by profession. He did not follow me home, and by morning, I forgot he asked me. Now, sometime after that, and I'm not sure of the span of time, but I came home from an Al-Anon meeting, and Eddie said, Bill was by. He picked up the stuff for the orphanage. I said, he did? He said, yeah. I said, where'd you find it? He said, the box is in the rumpus room. Now, for those of you who have not yet put it together, he got my ironing. And actually, from that day to this, I have no problems turning things over to God. Because my God, as I understand him today, has some of the most unique answers. I never would have thought of sending him to Mexico. And you know, besides all that, he made me look good, see? Now, I don't tell that story to be blasphemous because I think this whole way of life is spiritual. But by the same token, I don't think God wants to listen to me cry for the rest of my life. And I don't think counting the cracks on the sidewalk is necessary either. If you want my honest opinion, I think it kind of gives him a charge to hear me laugh. And to know that finally I'm beginning to enjoy this life that he saw fit to give me. So I try to keep a light touch. Now, it doesn't work 100% of the time. But that's okay. If he louses it up, I forgive him. You know, it's simple as that. I've had people ask me why I keep coming to Al-Anon, and it's a very simple answer. I'm nuts. And I can go right back out there, and I can be as crazy as I was any other time, you know. I need what you give me at these meetings in order to stay halfway balanced. And besides that, I'm married to a game player. I'm a game player. We just don't play the same games. And I'm going to tell you this, and then I'm going to shut up. I think my watch is right, but it may be stopped. Anyhow, Eddie had a very bad habit for a long, long time. He used to come home and on Wednesday afternoon, and he'd say, you know what, Winnie? You could use a game of golf. Now, that's what he said. That is not what he meant. What he meant was he'd called everybody else. They were already on the course. Say, well, I knew that. And even though we've been married for a long time, I don't want him to start taking me for granted. And so I keep a whole list of things that I never get around to. And when we play this game, you see, I tell him how much I would love to be with him. However, today I was going to defrost the freezer or clean my closet, God forbid iron. Anyhow, I keep the list, and we play with this back and forth, and finally he says, well, okay. He goes off and plays golf. He has a beautiful day. I'm stuck with the freezer. I did not like the way that game was turning out, and so I turned it over. And one night I went to a meeting, and I heard this lady say, whenever Paul asks me to do something that I really don't want to do, I merely say, I'd rather not. I like that because it had a classy ring compared to what I usually said. So a few nights later, I go to another meeting in an entirely different area, and there she is again. Nobody asked her even this time. She just all of a sudden said, whenever Paul asks me to do something I really don't want to do, I merely say, I'd rather not. Now, you figure it out. I've been to 2 meetings, 2 different areas, and this is the word. I've gotten it. So the next time Eddie came home, and he did, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, I think you could use a game of golf. I said, I'd rather not. He said, what the hell do you mean you'd rather not? I said, I really don't know. That's all Maxine ever tells Paul. But that's why I keep coming to Al-Anon, see, because I pick up these little tidbits and I work them on him, and he don't know what hit him. You know, It's just one of those things. I heard him say, and this is real fast, he said that he was telling some other poor guy, he says, I was always ready for her lectures, and I was pretty well prepared for her tantrums, but sometimes I'd walk in and she'd have a smile on her face and scared the hell out of me, you know. My best weapon, and I never used it. Anyhow, I'm going to close with a little poem that may mean nothing to you, and that's all right with me. It's a reminder to me, and that's what I'm here for, is because I need what I need. My sponsor gave it to me when my mother was very ill, and I couldn't let go of it. I just couldn't let go of it, even though I knew there was nothing I could do. And I guess Wilma took one look and decided that nothing in her vocabulary was going to bring me up out of that hole I was having so much fun in. So she handed me this poem, and the first time I read it, I had a mental picture of my kids used to come to me with their yo-yo, and they'd have the yo-yo clutched in that hand, attached to that hand, and they'd say, come on, Mom, get the knot out of the middle, which was impossible unless they handed me the yo-yo. And sometimes today when I'm in a tight spot and I don't have time for the whole poem, that's my silent little prayer. Please, God, I got another knot in the string. But anyhow, it goes like this. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I took my broken dreams to God because he was my friend. But then instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I sort of hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last, I snatched him back and cried, how can you be so slow? My child, he said, what could I do? You never did let go. So if I don't leave anything else here today for you to take away from this weekend from me, I hope you'll just try to remember one thing. If you can let go and let God and let the caring that we've shared here this weekend be a part of your life one day at a time, you've got the recipe for a good day. Because you see, God loves us in spite of all we think we've done. And we love each other in spite of all we think we've done. But you want to know why I love you? Because in my wildest dreams, I never could have found this way of life without places like this and people like you. Have a safe trip home. God bless, and thank you for listening.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected. even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.